Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. At a time when some are arguing that the judicial system should be more lenient to the accused, the City Council inquiry asked if the system could have prevented the murder of Portia Pollock had it acted more stringently. We'll look at the turmoil within the criminal court tonight, as well as the pandemic as a possible cause of the spike in crime. We'll also examine a new source of power for the Sewarge and Water Board, as well as the debate over what to do with the Municipal Auditorium and big changes inside the superdome. Our Future Watch segment investigates the likelihood of recurring summertime maladies, including the West Nile disease. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; LeBron Joseph, news anchor, reporter, WGNO TV, Channel 26; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. All righty, Dave, let's stay with you right now. And, we are seeing a crime spike, and there are those who relate it to the pandemic. So how do the two meet?
Well, we know one thing is for sure. Violent crime is up in the city of New Orleans and in cities all across the country at a time where we've just started to see the pandemic begin to wane, but there have been other social factors at work as well. And I think it's going to take some time before we know just how each interacts with what's been happening. I can tell you that in the city of New Orleans, that carjackings are up year to date 120%,
Wow.
more than double where they were last year, according to the New Orleans City Council's crime dashboard. Shootings are up 73%, and murders are up about 20%. And when you start asking the sociologists and the criminologists and the experts why this is happening, you'll get a variety of different answers. And the set of circumstances in New Orleans may be a little different than why they're seeing a violent crime spike in New York. But what we do know is that it's happened at the same time as the pandemic. It's happened at the same time that there's a movement for social reform and criminal justice reform. And it's happened at a time when many people were out of work and when there's been a police shortage. The New Orleans police right now only have about 1,000 officers. Every single police chief and mayor in modern history has said they need at least 1,500,
Right.
and have wanted near 2,000. So that has to be a factor, right? You hear all the time about people calling the police and them not responding for hours and hours or even days to things that are determined to be not of immediate attention for the NOPD. Now, there's been some argument about if they responded to some of these other things that perhaps there wouldn't be escalations and there wouldn't be a serious crime following. But to answer your question, how are they related? Time will tell, but we know that they have coincided. That while there's been children at home from school taking classes virtually, while there's been more unemployment, while there's been more difficulty economically, and while there's been a social reform movement in criminal justice, crime has spiked, and that's undeniable.
Okay, and so the stats that you gave us those were for Orleans Parish.
Correct.
What about in the metro area? Are we seeing similar occurrences in neighboring parish to Orleans?
Not really.
Parishes to Orleans?
Not nearly as dramatically, no. Now, there was not nearly as much violent crime in Jefferson, in St. Tammany, in Plaquemines, and St. Bernard, in St. Charles prior to the pandemic either. But we're not seeing these massive increases there like we are in New Orleans. We are seeing bleed over. We're seeing frequently now where cases that start in New Orleans move to Jefferson Parish, whether it be a police pursuit, whether it be a stolen vehicle that is taken from one parish to the other, whether it be a carjacking that starts in one and the vehicle's recovered in Jefferson Parish. No, to answer your question, we're not seeing nearly as dramatic increases in violent crime elsewhere in the metro area. It seems to be mostly in cities across the country, not suburban areas, not rural areas, where we're seeing these huge dramatic increases in violent crime. And the police, the NOPD, the mayor, the city council will all tell you that it's not just New Orleans, but then they'll always follow that with, but we have to fix it in New Orleans. And the question is, how can they or will they fix that? Clearly, everyone agrees they need more police officers on the street. everybody agrees that they need to find ways to address the root causes: the poor education system, the high poverty rate, the difficulty with getting parents to monitor and parent their children. But those are problems that we've had historically, well, for 300 years in the city of New Orleans.
And so the number of police on the police force, like you said, the number now is about 1,000, and we've always heard you need 1,500, maybe 1,600. So are we seeing a chance to at least increase these numbers somewhat?
No. In fact, they're going backwards. They're losing more officers than they're hiring right now. A lot of the problem is that with the social reform movement, a lot of people have either left the profession, they don't want to be police officers under the circumstances that they're having to work now, and fewer people want to become police officers. So you have fewer recruits, more people leaving, finding other jobs, and you have a net loss that continues to spiral downward. And the city's had budgetary problems. They were furloughing police officers at a time when there weren't enough cops to begin with, and that was a further deterrent to current officers and potential officers. So no, there's not any hope that in the near future the ranks are going to increase. They're rather going to decrease.
Well, I mean, it's all bad news, what you're telling us right now. It's rather pessimistic. I mean, what are we hearing from the force?
You know, when you ask the police union, when you ask the police command, they will admit wholeheartedly that there is a morale problem right now. They are arresting the same people over and over and over again. It's worse amongst juveniles, but it's the same with the adult system, just not quite as pronounced. But the police officers will tell you they don't know why they're bothering. They arrest somebody one day, put them in jail for a violent crime, a carjacking, a shooting, whatever the case may be. And particularly these juveniles, they say, are laughing in their face, saying, you can arrest me, but I'll see you in a couple days, because it's true. Because of the pandemic, because of the effort to reform the criminal justice system, to keep fewer people in jail, because of crowding and fear of disease spread, and because of the effort as a society to keep fewer people behind bars, we are seeing the criminals get bonded out, often on their own recognizance or for very little money, or there's someone who bonds them out for them, and they're right back on the street, and the cops are picking them up again for another violent crime just a few days or a few weeks later. That is hurting the morale, along with the anti-police sentiment that's in the community, and it's just not clear how you turn that around, how you suddenly take a police force that's frustrated, that's demoralized, to use the police chief's word, and get them to want to be enthusiastic and feel good about doing their job at a time when they seem to be the enemy, or when their work is not paying off, when they arrest somebody over and over again for often the same crimes.
All right, Dave, thank you. And when we have to move now, let's move on to LeBron, because what Dave has been talking about brings us over to what LeBron is going to talk about right now, and it's all related to the killing of Portia Pollock, which, of course, was a carjacking. And there was a hearing before the Council Criminal Justice Committee today. We learned more about ankle monitoring.
Yeah, the most alarming thing we learned about ankle monitoring is that while a judge may order someone to be monitored with an ankle monitor, that law enforcement doesn't keep up with that monitor. There's not a government agency that keeps up with that particular person. We learned that it's supposed to be the bail bonds agency, or whoever someone bonds out, and that the person is supposed to pay for that. And I think that was pretty alarming to most of the folks here. The Portia Pollock case is one where, in fact, you know, the chief often says, or what they would say in the past when we were getting these spikes in violent crime, and not necessarily the carjackings, but the shootings and the murders, is that a lot of these people know each other. This is a group of people that run in the same circle. They're either in gang stuff or in drug stuff or whatever the story is. But this is not, normal people doing things. Well, Ms. Pollock was a physical therapist, 60-year-old woman on her way to work, leaving her home on North Durgeon, and was preyed upon by Brian Andre. And what we've come to learn is that Brian Andre had been arrested for other violent crimes of carjacking or robbery or whatever, and had been allowed to be out. Judge Angel Harris justified letting him out by saying that he was supposed to be going to drug treatment and being monitored by the ankle monitor. And I'm not sure what the forward is going to be with this in terms of whether or not the council passes something or something is lobbied at the state legislative side in terms of ankle monitors. But if you're already talking about law enforcement agencies that claim they're already stressed, are already underfunded or whatever, I'm just not sure what law enforcement agency would now be charged with keeping up with someone with an ankle monitor.
Well, the council wasn't sure either, the council committee. Did someone want to say something?
I was going to say the council, what they're probably going to consider next, based on what we've gotten feedback from the council members after the hearing, is the first thing they want to do is put in rules and regulations for these companies that run these ankle monitoring companies, these ankle monitoring systems, that at least there will be a set of guidelines. There are none right now. Right now, anybody who wants can open up as a company to run an ankle monitor, and there are no rules or regulations they have to follow. They don't have to promise to respond to violations of the ankle monitor. They don't have to promise to pick up and re-jail the individual if they violate the terms. They don't have to promise to notify the judge in a timely manner. So those are some things they want to put in there saying, okay, if you're going to run an ankle monitoring service in New Orleans, you're going to be held accountable for responding to violations of their curfew or of their geo-tracking area where they're allowed to be within a certain amount of time. You have to notify in a certain amount of time, and if they violate, you have to pick them up and bring them to jail in a certain amount of time, because none of that happens now.
Ms. Pollock is scheduled to be buried tomorrow. Her funeral is tomorrow. There's been an outpouring of love across the community with vigils, and last Sunday, I should say, there was a drum circle. She was a well-known and well-loved drummer with the folks over in Congo Square, and I assume, weather permitting, it'll be a pretty big deal tomorrow as well for her homegoing service.
Right. The ankle monitoring, too, there was a coordinated system for it some years back, but that fell apart.
It was through the sheriff's office back then, and there were concerns about the integrity of the program and who was getting money from whom and if there were kickbacks, and there were a whole bunch of reasons that that was taken out of the sheriff's office. There's discussion now of perhaps having the district attorney's office be the ones alerted in the event of a violation of an ankle monitor, and that their investigators would respond to these violations. But there was questions amongst the judiciary and the city council about whether or not that was viable. So they're trying to work their way through it, but right now there are no good answers.
It seems that there should really be many, many, many examples across jurisdictions all across the country.
Exactly.
And you just take from somebody who's doing it right and you model it. It really,
Best practices.
This is not brain surgery here.
But the court said they have absolutely no money. They have no budget for it. They don't see any potential budget for it. And keep in mind, this whole judicial reform movement is that you're supposed to let poor people out of jail because it's unfair to keep them behind bars and to make them pay to get out of jail. Well, so if they're not going to pay for the cost of a solid monitoring program, if you're not going to pass that cost on to the person being monitored, who's going to pay for it?
Well, that's what's happening right now. The person that's being monitored is paying the monitor.
Especially violent crimes.
Yeah.
These types of crimes, they're the folks that we have to keep an eye on, and there's apparently not a system in our city that's reliable enough to be able to do that, and it's unfortunate.
Okay, more for discussion in the future at all levels, here at City Council, also at the state level, too. Okay. Thanks a lot, LeBron. Errol, let's go on over to you. There's talk about a reuse of Municipal Auditorium, and not everybody's happy about it.
Well, there's a story of two buildings here. First building is the existing City Hall, which, if you drive by, it still looks like a modern building. It's modern in architectural style, but it's pretty much, it was built in the 50s, and it's pretty much been a disaster for most of its existence. It doesn't function well. There are a lot of complaints about it, that it got some repair work a few years ago, and now it needs more. And so there's always been plans to replace City Hall. Let's go somewhere else. One plan, people talk about Charity Hospital, but now there's another plan for the Youth Charity Hospital. Ray Nagin had an idea of using a building, I think on Gravia Street, an office building. And then the current plan is the idea of using the Municipal Auditorium. Now, which is the other building in the factor, because that is what the mayor is proposing. The auditorium is an interesting building. It opened in 1930, and it opened as an attempt to have a multifunctional building where you could have all types of events, a big community event. And on the inside, it's a very good building. On the outside, to me, it's kind of ugly, but on the inside, it's a good building. It has 2 theaters in it. It has good facilities. It has good seatings. And for the longest time, it's where all the big events were held in New Orleans. When the circus would come to town at Thanksgiving, or when you'd have big name concerts or graduations. I mean, it was the building. Just over time, it got hit by the hurricane when gambling was legalized. That year or so that it took to develop the Harris Casino. It was a temporary casino. After Betsy, it never really came back. But the other threat is that there's more theaters in town, and so there's less need for it. So the question is, if you don't use the auditorium for City Hall, then what do you use it for? You go downtown, you got the Sanger, which is a great theater. You have the former Lowe State Theater, which is a big theater, but it's not being used for anything. You got the Joy Theater, which is currently closed. You got the Civic Theater, which is having no activity. Plus, and the big thing is the Smoothie King Center, which is the go-to place now with a lot of activity. And so you probably
Jackson right there also.
you probably don't need a lot of the auditorium for its original purpose. So what do you use it for? And perhaps a city hall would be a good use. But I think a lot of people are confused because this area with the site around there with the former Congo Square. And so it's very historically important. There's no doubt about it. But I remember in the 70s when the Landrieu administration wanted to build Armstrong Park, that there was a lot of criticism, a lot of neighborhood complaints saying, no, you're desecrating a sacred space by building Armstrong Park. Well, they did anyway, and now people will say, well, you're desecrating a sacred space by going after Armstrong Park. And so whatever is going there has caused some sort of opposition. I even remember when Tivoli Gardens, which is the big operation in Copenhagen, kind of silently looked at the possibility of relocating there, and there was just strong neighborhood opposition. So there's always that feeling about this being a sacred ground. Mayor Cantrell has said that whatever happens won't affect Congo Square. She said that maybe they'd have to move some streams around, but other than that, it won't. And so the issue is
the park would remain, but Armstrong Park would remain in this plan.
Oh yeah. The park definitely remains, but I think people are confused by that. But the news today is that what's fueling this is the possibility of a $38 million from FEMA, but they got to act on it by the end of the year. And today the mayor announced that they're going to go ahead and do all the paperwork and get the process rolling. But it doesn't mean it's going to be definite that's going to happen.
Okay.
They still want to have community input. But there's a lot that people still need to learn about this area and about its history and the process.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see where it all goes. Thanks a lot, E. Dawn, over to you. Summertime and other things to worry about in terms of viruses.
Well, I feel like all we've talked about, actually I know all we've talked about is COVID, and you forget about things like West Nile virus, which actually are still active in our area and were last summer, even though we never talked about it. COVID and COVID distancing didn't do anything to prevent mosquitoes from biting infected birds and therefore then biting humans and transmitting this disease that can be deadly. 80% of the people who get infected with West Nile virus don't ever know they're infected. But 1% of the people end up with severe West Nile disease, and 10% of that 1% ends up ultimately dying of that disease. We had 14 people in the state of Louisiana last summer who ended up with West Nile disease, another 9 with West Nile virus. And the experts say that it's possible there were many, many more because, sorry, I have to read from my list, but the symptoms of West Nile fever, headache, tiredness, body aches. Sound familiar? If you went to the doctor last summer with those things, you likely were tested for COVID. You likely weren't tested for West Nile virus. So it's possible that our numbers were a little higher last summer than are otherwise indicated. We are heading into National Mosquito Awareness Week next week. I didn't know there was such a thing, but be aware of mosquitoes as we're sitting here in the midst of a tropical system. We're creating all over our environment this weekend breeding grounds for mosquitoes. They can breed in something as small as the water left behind in an overturned bottle cap. So if there's water on your property, the best way to prevent mosquitoes is just to dump the containers, even the bottle caps, so you don't give the mosquitoes a breeding ground. You also don't want to be out at dawn or dusk when they're biting without some kind of protection, long sleeves, long pants, or bug sprays, or that sort of thing. They definitely are still around, these mosquito viruses. They're most typical between July and October. So now is really the time to just remember that mosquitoes are a problem. Remember that they cause viruses that can be fatal, or, encephalitis is not something you want to mess with if it leads to that. I'm told things like dengue fever and other diseases that come through mosquitoes were lessened by COVID just because there was less travel. But people were outside this whole time, and there were mosquitoes biting, and there were mosquitoes spreading viruses. So even though it hasn't been top of brain, it's still out there, and it's still a risk.
So mosquitoes, they certainly haven't gone anywhere, that's for sure.
No, and they'll be back in record numbers probably after this weekend, because there will be so many places for them to
And they get their own awareness
breed.
week. Who knew?
Yes, and there's an awareness week for them I didn't know anything about. So
Well,
now we all know.
Now we all know. Yeah, well, we're aware of them, definitely, that's for sure. Thanks a lot, Dawn. Dave, over to you. Sewage and Water Board, they're going to look to Entergy for their source of energy now.
Yeah, we've been talking about why does the Sewage and Water Board have century-plus old technology to power the delivery of drinking water in the city of New Orleans and the removal of flood water in the city of New Orleans through these turbines that seem to be broken more than they're operational. And there's been talk over the years about the exorbitant cost it takes to keep them running, because no one even makes the parts for them anymore because they're more than 100 years old. So you have to literally make parts to replace the parts that break. And the process is expensive, and it takes a long time. And they've been talking about buying new turbines for a long time, modern turbines. Until recently, they've been relying on backup generators for most of the power needed during rain events in the event that the turbines go down. Well, finally, all of the players got in a room together and they said, why don't we just build a new Entergy substation on the grounds of the Sewage and Water Board plant? And that's the plan now. They're going to actually build now it's not going to be a power plant. So if the feeder lines go down, for example, during a hurricane, they'll still lose that power. So they'll still need those massive, loud, bulky generators in the event that Entergy power is lost. But about 2 years from now, they expect to have this new Entergy substation up and running on the grounds of the Sewage and Water Board, which they say will dramatically decrease the number of power outages that they suffer. And that will mean fewer issues with powering the pumps, fewer issues with losing water pressure, leading to boil water advisories, and fewer issues overall with the Sewage and Water Board.
So it's going to take a little while to build this. In the interim, we're still relying on the turbines that are not yet fixed?
Well, there's about 1.5 turbines working right now out of the 6. And they keep trying to fix the others. But no, I think more than ever, what they're going to have to rely on is those massive, loud generators that all the neighbors near the plant complain about, because that's proven to be the only reliable way to power all of the needs of the Sewage and Water Board at this time. So those are going to be there for 2 more years. That's assuming that they meet their deadline of getting this new substation built in the next 2 years. They said it will be up and running prior to the 2023 hurricane season. They do say, though, that it's not going to increase the cost for Entergy bills or for Sewage and Water Board bills, that everything kind of balances out when it's all said and done, and that ratepayers will not see any increased cost, but they will see more reliable power.
More efficiency. Okay, thanks a lot, Dave. E, let's go on back over to you. Superdome's getting a new look.
When the Superdome was built, it was the second of all dome stadiums. The first one was the Ostrom in Houston, which influenced everybody, and it kind of touched off an era of dome stadiums. The Superdome came second. There were dome stadiums built in Minneapolis and in Seattle and Indianapolis. And so there was an area of development. Of all of those dome stadiums, the only one that still stands is the Superdome. And the difference is, and I think they were criticized a little bit, but New Orleans did the right thing, is they really built a quality building, whereas the other domes were sort of built on the cheap. It was pretty much a stadium with a roof on top. We wanted to build something that lasts. And so that's what happened. And our dome stadium still stands from the outside. It's a perfectly fine building, but in the era of modern stadiums, there's always new things that need to be done, new comforts for the fan, more competition. And so several times we've had to have a restoration project, and probably several times in the future we're going to do that too. So now the Superdome has gone through a big restoration thing. And one thing they're doing, which I think is really kind of interesting, especially if you got the tickets for it, is they're going to have box suites at field level. We're not talking about the ones up on the roof, but the ones at field level. And each one can have like 24 people per suite, which should be a pretty cool place to be in a game, kind of like when the players are running next to you. And so they're going to do that. They're going to have some areas at the corner of each section of the dome. It's kind of like standing room areas where you have an enhanced view and you can watch the game. They can do things with lighting and the concourses and just go over the overall fan improvement and try to make it better. They say they're literally working day and night to get this done because the first Saints preseason game is in August and they want to be able to debut it by then. But it's something we have to do to just maintain our quality stadium because so many other places have built stadiums last a few years. This isn't working anymore. Let's tear it down and build something new.
Right.
Instead, we've been able to just restore what we have.
But our Louisiana Superdome hangs on in there, and it's still a beautiful building. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what all these changes actually look like and how they work. All
and
right.
You know what? And they paid for the dome quickly, and they refinanced the domes. And the refinancing of the domes built Zephyr Stadium and the Ilario Center. So I think it's a good study in economics. I think we did a good job.
All righty. Other stories. E, we're staying with you.
A month from today, we'll know who's running for office in New Orleans. The qualifying closes on July 16th. And, and one person who won't be running announced today is Lawrence Morrell, who is the clerk of criminal court. He announced he's stepping aside. But anyway, all the council seats in the mayor's race will all be up.
Okay. LeBron, let's go on over to you.
Well, we got a new state and federal holiday, Juneteenth, which is tomorrow, June 19th, in commemoration of the freeing of the slaves in Galveston, Texas in 1865. It's always been a muted celebration here in New Orleans. Many say because New Orleans fell so early in the Civil War, it was already under Union control. But it is huge in other parts of the country, and I assume it'll continue to grow here in the New Orleans area as well.
I bet it will. All right. Thanks a lot, LeBron. Dawn, let's go over to you.
Just a reminder after the rains end this weekend to get out there and dump any buckets, even bottle caps that have water in them, so that we're not back here talking about major West Nile cases in a few months.
Good advice. Thanks, Dawn. All righty. Dave, to you. Wrapping it up.
State and federal authorities are getting ready to break ground on a new project to protect St. John the Baptist Parish and western areas of Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas by extending the levee system that currently protects Orleans, Jefferson, and the New Orleans metro area.
Very good. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us, too, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.